let's talk about the ancient city of Nineveh. You know, the capital of the famously brutal Assyrian Empire. In the Bible, Nineveh is at the heart of this huge mystery, because two different prophets declare two completely opposite futures for the city. So how's that even possible?
And this is the big question, right? This is the paradox we're going to try and solve. First, you've got the prophet Jonah. He's sent to Nineveh, preaches to them, and the entire city gets spared. But then about a century later, another prophet, Nahum, shows up with a very different message. Total, complete annihilation. So what happened? Did God just change his mind? Is this a major contradiction?
You can see the tension laid out perfectly right here. On one side, Jonah is using words like grace, mercy, steadfast love. On the other, Nahum comes in with avenging and wrathful. We're talking about the same God and the same city, but these two descriptions feel like they're from different universes. To figure out how they both can be true, we have to look at each prophet's message one by one.
Okay, so let's start with the God of mercy, the one we see through the eyes of the prophet Jonah. Now, here's what's so wild about this verse. This isn't Jonah singing God's praises. Nope. This is his complaint. He is literally angry because he knew from the very beginning that God was so merciful he'd probably forgive Nineveh, Israel's most hated enemy, if they turned things around. Jonah wanted justice, but he was up against a God he knew was overwhelmingly merciful.
And that phrase, abounding in steadfast love, uses this really important Hebrew word, hesed. This isn't just a mood or a fleeting feeling of kindness. Hesed is this deep, loyal, commitment-based love. It's about a faithful promise within a relationship. And this is the attribute of God that Jonah knew would probably get Nineveh off the hook.
All right, now let's flip the coin and look at the other side, the God of wrath, as seen by the prophet Nahum.
You feel that shift? The focus is all on vengeance and justice now. What's fascinating is that both prophets say God is slow to anger, but they mean completely different things by it. For Jonah, it leads to mercy, but for Nahum, it leads somewhere else. He adds that absolutely crucial line, "The Lord will by no means clear the guilty."
The key here is the Hebrew word for power, which is koach. Nahum connects God's slowness to anger not with mercy, but with this incredible power. The idea is that God's patience isn't a sign of weakness, it's the intense restraint of a being with immense might. And that kind of patience, well, it has a limit.
So there's our paradox. Jonah gives us a God of radical mercy. Nahum gives us a God of terrifying justice. So what gives? Did God's character change? Or were the prophets seeing something that we're missing? The answer isn't just about Nineveh. To really solve this puzzle, we have to go back, way back, to the original source.
And the key that unlocks this whole thing is what we could call the Exodus blueprint. It's the moment God first describes himself, his own character, to Moses.
And there it is. This is the source code. Read that carefully. It has both sides of the paradox right there, in the same sentence. It kicks off with all the mercy, the grace, the steadfast love, but it finishes with this unshakable promise of justice.
When you break it down like this, it becomes so clear. God's identity, as it's presented here, isn't an either-or, it's a both-and. He is a God who forgives sin, absolutely. But he's also a God who doesn't just sweep guilt under the rug. These two truths are held together in this perfect, unbreakable tension.
And that brings us to the big resolution. Two prophets working from the very same blueprint.
Okay, this table just makes everything click into place. Look at that top line for Exodus 34. It has all the check marks. All the attributes are there. Now look down at Jonah. See what he does? He quotes the first half, the mercy part, and he just leaves off the part about not clearing the guilty. Now look at Nahum. He does the opposite. He grabs the slow to anger part, but he pairs it directly with the second half, the justice part.
So there's the solution. It's not a contradiction, it's a difference in emphasis. In Jonah's time, Nineveh actually repented, so God's mercy was the truth for that moment. But by Nahum's time, after another 100 years of brutal violence, God's justice was the aspect of his character that needed to be declared.
And here's a really crucial point. This standard of mercy and justice, it wasn't just for Nineveh. It was a universal standard.
In fact, God holds his own people to the exact same standard. Way back in the book of Leviticus, God warns Israel that if they are the ones who break the covenant, they will face his vengeance. The rules don't just change depending on who you are.
I mean, that is a pretty radical idea. God's justice is presented as being totally impartial. The same moral standard that applies to Nineveh, the enemy, also applies to Israel, the chosen people.
This means that mercy is on the table for anyone who repents, and justice is required for anyone who doubles down on their evil.
So how do you actually hold these two things together, perfect justice and perfect mercy? Well, this leads us to the ultimate resolution of the whole paradox.
This quote from the theologian John Stott just says it so well. The cross isn't a place where God's justice and mercy fight it out. It's presented as their perfect meeting point, a divine combined action. It's the one moment where God's absolute hatred of sin is fully satisfied, while at the same time, his steadfast love for people is fully expressed.
So in the end, the paradox of Nineveh forces us to see something much bigger. It points us to a God whose justice and love aren't actually in conflict. They're two sides of the same perfect character, shown most clearly and most powerfully in one single world-changing event.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on. If God's justice and his mercy are perfectly inseparable, if they're not opposites but are two parts of a single whole, how should that change the way we view our world? It suggests that maybe true compassion has to care about justice, and that true justice has to be filled with mercy. That's a paradox worth thinking about.